Right, so Israel's run out of excuses again, so they've started digging up some new ones. The bombing, as we know, never stopped. It just got relabelled ceasefire, and now the latest moral cover story is that Hamas sent them the wrong remains of Israeli hostages, and they must have done it on purpose. That's the hook, the pretext to switch the war machine all back on. Trouble is, it's already fallen apart. Haaretz, one of Israel's own papers, says Hamas warned them the IDs were uncertain. Other outlets have said Israel is blocking forensic tools and every DNA kit that could have proved who was who, and that they banned the autopsy tools needed as well. Then CENTCOM steps in with a miracle drone clip of Hamas looting aid. One truck, no proof, just propaganda. The whole thing stinks of coordination. Washington and Israel now both fabricating stories which get debunked. Israel, of course, fabricates more moral outrage off the back of it, despite the clear lack of morals on show in their government. And together it is becoming more and more obvious that they're both clearing the runway to start the genocide in full, all over again. Right, so Israel's government is accusing Hamas of returning the wrong remains. The claim runs like this, you see. Hamas sent back bodies said to be Israeli captives, and forensic tests proved they weren't. The insinuation is deliberate deceit, though, that Hamas is mocking Israel by handing over random corpses. It's the kind of story designed to stir fury and reignite a war, isn't it? Once you strip away all of their slogans, the whole thing collapses under its own weight, because Israel already knew the remains were uncertain. They were told as much beforehand, and they also know full well that they've banned the equipment that could have confirmed their identity back in Gaza, and it's used that chaos as another pretext, the last trigger to try and end this blasted ceasefire, which is threatening Netanyahu's posterior on his gilded throne. Haaretz reported that Hamas had told Israel in advance it wasn't sure who the remains belonged to. Channel 12 confirmed that forensic tests later found they didn't match any of the 11 Israeli captives still unaccounted for. But it's also been revealed that Israel itself has blocked all DNA testing materials from entering Gaza. Euromed Human Rights Monitor backed that up by listing the equipment barred under the dual-use pretext: autopsy tools, lab instruments, even cotton swabs for DNA analysis. In other words, Israel destroyed the forensic capacity, then blamed Hamas for the confusion that then caused. Hamas's statement to it all was rather blunt. It said its recovery teams were still digging through debris where bodies lay under collapsed towers, and that they'd asked international mediators and the Red Cross to send in additional personnel and testing kits. Israel refused. Instead, its military briefed journalists that Hamas was delaying returns and violating the terms of the ceasefire. But that spin has turned a logistical impossibility created by Israeli bombardment and blockade into moral ammunition for yet another offensive. We know how it works by now, don't we? Meanwhile, the United States stepped in to lend credibility to their narrative, actually, by adding a story of its own. The US Central Command, CENTCOM, announced that one of its drones had spotted suspected Hamas operatives looting an aid truck in southern Gaza. No proof, just a short grainy clip and a caption. But the video showed one vehicle, no clear insignia, no timestamp, and yet American outlets ran it as fact. CENTCOM claimed nearly 600 aid trucks enter Gaza daily, a figure that every humanitarian agency on the ground immediately contradicted. UNRWA, the OCHA, the World Food Programme, they all said the real number was roughly a quarter of that, sometimes far less. The Gaza media office called the US claim fabricated and baseless, describing it as part of a systematic disinformation campaign aimed at discrediting the Palestinian police who were escorting the envoys. Those police, they reminded the world, have lost more than 1,000 officers whilst protecting aid deliveries from airstrikes and from looting from gangs backed by Israel. The pattern ought to be more than familiar to us by now. Israel needs moral cover to break a truce and provided a reason of their own for that, illegitimate as that might be. The United States provides a story too that makes that mindset look all the more justified. It's the same choreography during every pause before this, isn't it? Hamas accused of firing first, Israel responding, the bombing resumes, and Washington nods gravely about Israel's right to defend itself. This time, though, the narrative has started to unravel faster than usual because the facts are visible and the contradictions far too sharp to just bury like that. According to Gaza's government media office, Israel has allowed only 24% of the agreed aid and commercial trucks to enter under the ceasefire deal. That figure was confirmed by independent monitoring by the likes of the OCHA and the WFP. Israel still restricts fuel, still restricts electricity, still restricts medical supplies, the very things that keep hospitals and morgues functioning. So while CENTCOM is there accusing Hamas of stealing one truck, Israel is openly blocking 3/4 of all humanitarian aid. It's a siege disguised as logistics management. The blockade is not a side effect, it becomes the method. Dr. Ahmed Al-Farad, director of Al Tahrir Hospital near the Nasser Medical Complex, described what that blockade meant in practice. He said that out of every 7 bodies brought in, only 1 can be identified because decomposition and injury makes recognition almost impossible. Many show burns, binding marks, or evidence of extreme trauma. Some, he said, were hollowed out, organs missing, and the cavities packed with cotton. Others bore circular burns consistent with heated metal rods. None of these details have been disproved. Israel simply refuses access for independent forensic teams to verify them. For the families waiting at the gates, there's no process, no paperwork, no closure, just a line of unidentifiable corpses and a state that controls even the right to know who has died. The International Committee of the Red Cross has confirmed that it facilitated the transfer of remains between Hamas and Israel. Its role is strictly humanitarian. But the ICRC also said that Israel's obstruction of forensic materials is crippling recovery efforts. When a warring state blocks DNA kits, autopsy tools, and refrigeration units, it's not just breaching medical protocol, it's destroying the chain of evidence. And that's still on top of all the bombing they're conducting going on. Without that chain, though, no war crimes tribunal can function. So this is how accountability ends up dying. This is why it's essential we get journalists in there, and why Israel is so resistant to that, frankly terrified of the prospect. Israel insists that this is about security, that DNA kits and lab instruments and even cotton swabs are dual use and could be diverted for military purposes. I am blowed if I can work out how Hamas can possibly weaponize a cotton bud, but apparently they can. It's a claim that just doesn't survive contact with reality. It's a nonsense, and yet it's still accepted as fact. What's really being secured here isn't safety, it's impunity. The blockade doesn't just stop fuel, it stops proof. So everywhere you look, the same logic ends up applying. Hospitals ration electricity not because Hamas hoards fuel, but because Israel limits entry to a few trucks a day. Bakeries closed because the ovens can't run without gas. Water stations shut down. Sewage plants overflow. Disease spreads. Each failure is later cited as evidence of Hamas mismanagement when it is in fact the direct result of Israeli policy restricting items being allowed into the strip. This is why Gaza's authorities say 24%. They're counting the gap between promises and deliveries, between what's announced at press conferences and what actually crosses the gate. The hypocrisy peaks when Israel lectures about dignity for its own dead. Palestinian families receiving bodies from Israeli custody have documented bound wrists, execution-style gunshots, and missing organs. Multiple media outlets have published evidence of torture marks on those bodies, as well as calling for international forensic investigations. And Israel blocks that. I can't imagine why. So the same government accusing Hamas of disrespecting remains is returning corpses that medical professionals describe rather charitably, all things considered, as mutilated. At home, Israel's far right has taken that logic further. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, for it is he, once again, has renewed his push for a death penalty law targeting Palestinians convicted in military courts already notorious for secret evidence and coerced confessions. He appeared on video yet again in a prison, because he seems to be making a habit of that of late, next to bound prisoners demanding that terrorists be executed. Hamas condemned it as state-endorsed revenge, not justice, but Ben-Gvir's rhetoric fits the pattern. Each step that dehumanizes Palestinians becomes the moral groundwork for the next atrocity, and he's threatening to pull the plug on Netanyahu's coalition if he doesn't get his wish. Meanwhile, Washington maintains the pose of mediator while enabling every breach. It knows Israel is striking targets during the supposed ceasefire. The OCHA has logged the shelling and the drone fire almost daily, but it refuses to call those violations. Instead, US officials echo the line that Hamas is undermining progress. The CENTCOM video is just the latest attempt to reset the narrative, to make the occupier look besieged and the besieged to look criminal, and yet the numbers betray the script. One unverified truck versus 300 trucks a day denied entry at all. One alleged looting against thousands of verified airstrikes. The scale itself exposes the lie. But what all this reveals is how information warfare has ended up replacing diplomacy. The ceasefire is not meant to hold, it's meant to perform stability while Israel rearranges the battlefield. Its yellow line within the Gaza Strip is proof of that happening. Each breach becomes another test of international tolerance. When outrage fades, they push further. When headlines turn, they hit again. The wrong remains story was supposed to be the moral shock that justified resuming strikes. Instead, it backfired completely because the documentation trail all points the other way, and more people are questioning what Israel told them. Israel engineered the confusion it's now using as an excuse and is getting called out for it. Forensic science is supposed to be neutral. DNA doesn't care about politics, you see. But when the state controls the swabs and the microscopes, the truth itself becomes contraband. The blockade of forensic materials isn't just a technical issue, it becomes a form of censorship. It stops Gaza doctors from proving what was done to their patients. It stops international investigators from building cases. It turns the rubble into silence. That's why this matters more than the propaganda cycle, because without evidence, there can be no accountability, and without accountability, every ceasefire is just an interval between crimes. Even Israel's domestic press has started to sense the danger. Haaretz has published editorials warning that Netanyahu's government is losing credibility abroad, one of the few Israeli outlets that at times holds him to account, or tries to. The longer it insists on stories that collapse under scrutiny, the more isolated it becomes, especially as they get exposed. Each exposed falsehood weakens the diplomatic shield that has kept the war going. When a state's self-defense narrative depends on blocking DNA kits and staging drone videos, it's already lost the moral war. For Palestinians, though, the cost is all too real. It's the daily grind of hunger, disease, and grief under blockade. It's the mother waiting at a hospital door holding a photograph because the body inside has no face left to match it. It's the medic trying to keep a generator running long enough to take one last sample before the fuel runs out. These are not metaphors. They're the physical consequences of this policy. Decisions taken, signatures inked, shipments stopped. So when Israel tells the world Hamas has broken the ceasefire, remember the paperwork. Remember the list of banned items, the aid trucks turned away, the bodies sent to Gaza stripped of organs and names. The evidence isn't hidden, it's just treated as irrelevant. But it's all there in the manifest and the reports, the numbers that don't lie. 24% of aid allowed in, 11 bodies still missing, one lie too many. And they can shout about wrong remains and aid theft all they like. The record shows who's withholding the test kits and who's starving the hospitals and who's afraid of the truth those tests would prove. The blockade of evidence is the blockade of Gaza itself, and that's the part they can't spin away, because sooner or later every lie meets a fact it can't bury. This one just did. Israel really doesn't like it when the truth comes out. It's why they have such a problem with individuals such as Francesca Albanese, of course, even now resorting to calling her a witch over her latest report. Well, she had a response to that line as it happens, and Israel liked that even less. So get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people. I'll hope to catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.